Welcome to episode number 4, The Power of Forgiveness, and I'm going to be sharing with you a story, a Christmas story, and how I did not speak with my father for 27 years, and then I finally did. Hey, have you heard about Anchor FM? If you haven't heard about it, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First off, it's free. There's also creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make one podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That is ANCHOR.FM to get started. There's something about the process of forgiveness that seems so simple and yet so powerful. And it's challenging many times because many of us are simply not willing to do the forgiveness work to get to the other side, where some of the benefit of doing the forgiveness work is. Some of those benefits are a reduced stress, a freedom of expression, a letting go and letting be, letting love lead the way. It could even just be that a simple releasing of a desire, just a letting go of things actually being able to be different than they were, a different outcome. So I'm going to share with you a little story about my life and forgiveness in one particular area of my life. Welcome to the Blueprint of Living an Extraordinary Life podcast. My name is Theo Tilton. I'm a licensed New Thought practitioner, public speaker, certified life mastery consultant, and development life coach. Each week, I'm on a mission to provide concrete practices in the art of being and doing and getting that physical, reliable result with a system of support, leaving you moved, inspired, and empowered on your way to living an extraordinary life. Thank you for spending time with me today. Now let's head over to the Blueprint of Living an Extraordinary Life. With regards to my father. So right now I am 48, almost 49 years old. But back when I was 12, so it is Christmas time and I'm running around the house and it's my aunt's house and a bunch of my cousins and we're all spending the holiday together. I'm with my father and my stepmother. You see, my parents, my birth parents, my mother and father were divorced when I was very, very young. And they had a little bit of a shared custody type of thing. And I would visit my father on the weekends, whenever possible. And it was this was the year, Christmas, where I was sharing Christmas with my dad. And so all of us cousins were causing a ruckus around the house. And there was a bunch of us, probably 4 or 5 of us. So we're between the ages of 8 and 12. I'm 12. And my aunt, she comes down and she says, okay, it's time to get ready for Christmas dinner.
And so we're still running around the house and laughing and yelling and being kids. And my aunt was obviously getting a little frustrated and upset that we were just continuing to run around the house and be playful. And my father stepped in and said, "Okay, enough is enough. You haven't listened to your aunt. And you're all going to be punished." And my father proceeded to take all of the kids, all of us, into the back room and say, "Okay, bend over. You're all going to get a spanking." And I was completely resistant to the idea, considering I was 12 years old. And my father was very clear in pointing out that I was going to go first because I was going to set the example because I was the oldest one. And so I was told to literally stand in front of my father, pull down my pants and expose my butt and bend over his knee. And I've totally resisted that, being especially in front of my cousins. Needless to say, eventually submitted and did what my father asked and proceeded to be spanked very hard in front of my cousins. And while doing so, my father started to laugh. And he says, "You have peach fuzz on your butt." And then he completely broke out and started laughing. And, "My goodness, you've got a hairy butt." And then all of my cousins started laughing also. And then my father said, "Pull up your pants. We're done here. Let's go eat." And I looked at my father and I looked at my cousins in complete and utter disgust. My father, in fact, all my entire family, my entire namesake, the entire Tilton family. How could he embarrass me like that in front of everyone and then laugh? And then, make an example of me in such a way that I was the only one that was going to be spanked and no one else would be punished. Inside my mind, something snapped, and I wanted to have nothing to do with my father or my father's family. In fact, I didn't want to be a Tilton anymore. I remember returning home and saying to my mother very adamantly and strongly that I never wanted to go back, and was it possible for me to change my last name? Like, she knew something was up. And she didn't know why. She didn't ask why. She knew that I was upset. And she said that whatever it was that I wanted, she supported me 100%. If I didn't want to go to my father's on the weekends anymore, she would support me. And she would let my father know. And I said, "That's it. It's my decision." And I did that. And from that moment forward, I did anything and everything within my power to distance myself as far away as possible and disassociate myself. But I focused on my education. There was just something categorically challenging with the entire family. And I just wanted nothing to do with that. I did not want to repeat that. There was something, even at that age, I was like, that is not going to be my life. And then about, I guess 4 years later, was it 4 years? No, it was more like 5 years later. I was around 17. I was heading off to college, and I did see my father for about 15 minutes. And it was very uneventful. It was really more designed by me to rub in his face that I was going to college. That all of the Tiltons I had already achieved something so much bigger than any of them have. I graduated high school, and I was going to college, and so, I decided to not rubbing it in his face too much longer, and I just completely had a completely different worldview of the family. I didn't want to be a construction worker or a janitor for the rest of my life, and I really struggled with that was in my timeline. That was my internal struggle, is that it was my bloodline. That this was my bloodline that we were talking about. And was I destined to repeat what was already there in my family's history? My mother came from a completely different side of it, a completely different thing. She was one of 6, and there was struggle on their side of the family too, but they were definitely more open to education and such of that nature. And I just wanted to break free from all of the patterns of my father's bloodline. And so, I ended up graduating college with a triple major, double bachelor's, making a 6-figure income in corporate America as a software engineer. I did fantastically in the area of health and well-being and finances. However, my relationships did suffer, and I did find myself hitting a wall, and I kept repeating the same patterns of relationship, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, abuse in relationships. And some things that I had noticed over time from my father and his side of the family. And I was like, I'll be damned, why am I repeating that? And I started blaming my father. I was blaming him for everything that did not go right in a relationship. I blamed my father, and over time I started to begin to forgive myself. I was like, it's time I gave up on that. It's time I forgave myself and gave myself a different chance. Gave myself the ability to start something new, something fresh, something to express differently, be in a more powerful, intimate relationship. And that showed up. I happened to be in a beautiful relationship at the time, and beautiful is contextual. It turns out that relationship ended up ending as well, and that's a completely different story that I can share at some point in the future. But there was lots of breakthroughs, lots of ahas, lots of transformation that occurred in this relationship. And one of them was I had planned a trip to Hawaii with my boyfriend at the time. And it was back in 2013, and I decided to retake a course called the Landmark Forum during a layover. And we were going to do this course together in San Jose, California, on our way to Hawaii. And everything was planned. And I knew that in this course, there's a whole section where you get to write a letter to your parents. And I had done this in the past, from when I did the Landmark Forum the first time. I wrote a letter to my father, tried to reach out to him and forgive him and all kinds of stuff. And through a series of phone calls, discovered that he was in jail. And it triggered a whole bunch of stories in my mind that even gave me more proof and evidence that the person I was being in life was clearly demonstrating that I was not a Tilton, that I was better than a Tilton. And but through an interesting twist of life events, 4 weeks prior to my trip to Hawaii, I received a message from one of my cousins, one of the same cousins in the story that I was sharing about Christmas time and that spanking story. And she reached out to me and asked me if I heard anything about my father, and I replied, and I said, no, why? Why would I ask? I haven't spoken or heard about my father in 27 years, basically. And she shared her story, and she shared the story about my father. And she remembered. She totally remembered about the spanking, and she also remembered that I disappeared. She's like, you disappeared. And well, during this call, she mentioned that my father was not doing well, that he had dementia and he was slowly transitioning, and he was falling in health, basically failing in health. And he was in a specialized nursing home for dementia patients in Northern California, which was about 2 hours away from where I was going to be in San Jose. And I found this to be extraordinary. What was the likelihood that I was randomly going to take a course on my way to Hawaii during a layover in San Jose, California, being a New Jersey-born resident, raised here, haven't seen or heard of my father in the past 27 years, now having, him being inside of a dementia, basically, clinic in a town 2 hours north of where I was going to be taking this course. There's no coincidence at all. So I started to plan. I started to have a conversation, with the dementia clinic, and I told them what was going on, and they, after hearing my story, the woman basically put her job on the line, considering HIPAA and everything else, and she was like, listen, I've heard your story. Your story's amazing. I want to make sure that you talk to your dad, and and I didn't want to get sucked into any kind of drama or anything like that. So here it is, somewhere around May of 2013, and I've been given authority to call, and so I call the clinic, and as I say, this is Mr. Tilton. I'm calling for Mr. Tilton Sr., and the phone was given right to him. And I had like this entire script that I was going to say. I had this entire story that I was going to bring out. And as soon as he answered the phone, it was like, I'm just going to stick to the script. I'm not going to be, and there's not going to be any emotion. And then I heard his voice. And that 12-year-old inside child started to break down and cry. And I realized in that moment, at 42, I was being completely controlled by a 12-year-old. And I had to go take responsibility for not having this conversation sooner. I had to take responsibility for who I was being in the relationship. So I apologize for waiting so long. That I had a very rough life, and I acknowledged the rough life, and that he had a very rough life, and I let him know that I blamed him for everything that went wrong in my life, and that I was no longer going to do that I was going to stop doing that, and that I forgave myself for waiting so long, and I forgave him for everything that I made up about him, and told him that I was doing really well. I was in a relationship, taking multiple vacations every year, living a fantastic life. I owned a house, made a 6-figure income, had a Porsche. I was like, living this on the exterior. I was like living a great life, and he apologized, and then all of a sudden he broke down and started crying, and he apologized and said that the worst decision he had ever made his entire life was to leave my mom. And he asked how she was doing. And I told him how my mother was doing, and he said, I always loved your mother. I'm so sorry. And all of this happened over the phone. I was never ever really able to see him face to face. And I said, Woody, forgive me for that. And I was like, listen, I'm literally flying on a plane in a few hours and to go to Hawaii. And he got so excited when I told him about Hawaii. He's like, oh, you're going to Hawaii? He's like, oh, I've never been there. And I was like, it's a beautiful place, and I've been there like 5 or 6 times already. He's like, 5 or 6 times? And it was just a really precious conversation. And when I hung up the phone, we said our goodbyes, and I told him I wasn't sure if I was ever going to really see him. But I'm sorry that I might not ever really get to see you. And he said, that's okay. This has been the best day of my life, he said. You're my boy. And the waterfalls of joy and love and peace and forgiveness poured out of my eyes. And went to Hawaii, and 2 weeks later came back home. And I never thought that I would ever be able to forgive him for publicly humiliating me at 12 years old. And looking at that and how it took 27 years to be in a place of forgiveness. And here it is, 4 weeks after I come home from Hawaii, completely forgetting about the situation. I was so filled with peace. And I received a phone call from my cousin, and she asked me, were you ever able to reach out to your father? And I shared with her the story of what happened and how we cried together and we forgave each other and we said we love each other. And then my cousin started to break down into tears. She said, I'm so happy to hear that. You have no idea how happy I am to hear that. Your father passed away last night. Up until that point, I really realized that I had been controlled by a 12-year-old boy. The transformation that I went through of forgiveness and restoring love and affinity and restoring power back to that 42-year-old man that was now back in control of his own life was such an amazing experience and freed me up to be fully at the helm of my own life again. If there is an area of your life where there is a power of forgiveness that is needed, I encourage you to do it. We all have a finite time in this human experience. Spiritually, it is true that we are never born and we never die. But in this body temple experience, in this human born experience, we are born and we do have a death. We do have a timeline. inside of this body. And when we experience circumstances and conditions that may require us to fall into forgiveness and restore love and affinity to our friends and our family and our fellow man and women or business partners or trusted colleagues, as a coach, right now I encourage you to be inside of a process of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something that's one and done. It is a process that happens repeatedly. And, inside one of the programs that I offer, a 12-week program, we spend at least 2 weeks on forgiveness. I know 100% for sure that my life today would not be the same had I not practiced forgiveness and provided myself a path to restore power and self-expression in my own life. And this is what I want for you and for all of my clients and listeners. So if you or someone wants to speak with me regarding forgiveness, restoring love and affinity where it seems to have been lost, I'm available anytime for a strategy call. And I left a link inside of the description of this particular podcast episode where you can click that link and set up a time to speak with me about it. So I'm going to close this topic here. And until next time, thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you for joining me and listening to today's episode. I trust that there is something that you experienced on today's podcast that has left you touched, moved, and inspired. I would love to connect with you. If you're an Anchor member, you can leave me a message and leave any kind of question that I can answer on future podcasts. If you'd like to hear more about Life Mastery, Dream Builder, or other personal development programs that I coach with my clients, you can email me directly at theo@theotilton.com. And you can find me on all social media channels, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. My handle is Theo Tilton. Also, you can find me on Facebook at Theo Tilton Coaching. Thank you.